So, Chapter 28, we're going to deal with a more foreign policy focus for the United States. More imperialism, more looking out beyond our borders and trying to spread our influence around the world. It seems that after every single war in America or anywhere in the world, countries tend to, because their attention is distracted from the needs of the domestic policies of the country, they tend to become, after the war, very isolationist in their views. They really don't want anything to do with the rest of the world. And that was always the way the United States was. So after the Civil War, we are very isolationist in our policies, our foreign policies particularly. We really didn't pay attention to what the rest of the world was doing. It didn't matter to us. We had to focus on getting our country right and stable again. So by the late 1800s, there are a few people out there championing for a more imperialistic policy. There were some definite stirrings among them. One of them was Reverend Josiah Strong. He writes a work called Our Country, Its Possible Future, and Its Present Crisis. And what he says in that work is we have a duty to influence in a positive way the rest of the world. We have a duty to Christianize the rest of the world. We have a duty to spread our good values and show the rest of the world what we do in America to make it right. Theodore Roosevelt and Henry Cabot Lodge, a couple others who are going to be big in our political spectrum after the turn of the century, they too are spreading the idea of we have to be more powerful, we have to be more aware of what's going on in the rest of the world. They believed in social Darwinism. The strongest will survive, the weak will go away, and we have a duty to be among the strong. Our country was way too powerful and influential to let it rest on its laurels. So what's going on imperialistically around the world? Well, there was this grab or scramble for Africa among especially the European countries, France, Belgium, Great Britain, Germany, Netherlands. They were all influencing Africa and trying to grab different pieces of it and colonize that area. It was ripe for colonization. Germany, the United Kingdom, Japan, Russia, they all get involved in China, and they sort of slice and dice China up like a pie, and each grab a sphere of influence, as it's called. They each want a piece where they are influential as a foreign country. India gets imperialized by Great Britain. They go in and essentially overthrow the rebellion there and set up a stable government that would dominate India until the mid-1900s. Captain Alfred Thayer Mann, an American, he writes a book called, now he's a Navy guy, okay, captain, and he writes a book called The Influence of Sea Power Upon History, and his basic thesis is that he who has the strongest Navy will dominate the world. Pretty simple. He who has the strongest Navy will dominate the seas. And if you dominate the seas, his premise was, you dominate the world. So he was calling for a stronger Navy in the United States, that we had to refurbish, rebuild, rethink our naval structure. We had let the Navy kind of go down as far as its power and might and numbers of ships and so forth after the Civil War. We really didn't focus on the rebuilding of it because we were focused on the domestic issues. He also calls for an Isthmian canal. That's a tough word. An Isthmian canal in order to facilitate ships, American naval ships particularly, going from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean without having to go around the southern tip of Africa, okay, Cape Horn. That cuts off days and days and days and days of a trip, weeks of a trip with the Navy. So if you can just cut through the Isthmian, which we know is that little skinny piece of land that connects North America to South America, and if we just cut through where the skinny part is and build a canal that can handle these massive ships, then that will make our Navy that much stronger, because we can easily take our Navy in the Atlantic and move it to the Pacific, or vice versa, should the need arise. We wouldn't need two separate navies. James G. Blaine, who was the Secretary of State under Cleveland and Harrison, he calls for a big sister policy. He basically says, you know, we have all these countries in Latin America that are sort of ripe for the picking as far as trade agreements go, we should probably take advantage of that. They're close geographically. They have great stuff that they can grow, particularly produce. Think about where we get our coffee from. And we should probably take advantage of the fact that we should establish trade agreements with Latin America in order to facilitate more and better trade. We come to the brink of war, brinksmanship, with various countries over the course of the late 1800s. There was an issue that came up over the Samoan Islands about who was going to dominate there. The Germans had been in place there. We sort of stretch our influence, and they get angry about that. So the United States versus Germany, we kind of go head-to-head with them. It ends diplomatically. There's no gunfire or anything like that. But it does kind of test our will as far as staying out of war. There was a situation that arises in New Orleans where there were 11 Italians lynched in New Orleans. And Italy gets very angry and upset about that. And they threatened some reprisals against the United States if we did not make amends, which we very quickly reached out and apologized and made reparations for that. And then there's a situation in Valparaiso, Chile, where there was some disgruntledness and so forth, and we sort of go head-to-head with the Chilean government, but nothing comes of that either. So everything is sort of hunky-dory, we're okay, we're dealing with things diplomatically, things are just rocking along. And then we have a situation in Venezuela. Now, in Venezuela, there was a boundary dispute between Venezuela itself and British Guiana. And there was an issue about where the boundary actually lay. Did it lay east or west of the line that they were arguing over? The problem here is both sides didn't, we sort of negotiated on the part of the Venezuelans due to the Monroe Doctrine. We didn't really want British forces involved here. But the problem that keeps us from negotiating a peaceful end to this outright is the fact that they find gold near the border. So both sides are claiming that territory as theirs because they realize how valuable it's going to be. Secretary of State Olney, who was the Secretary of State under McKinley, Secretary of State Olney announces to the British, that he says basically, hey, back off. You know, the Monroe Doctrine is still in place from way back 100 years ago, and you guys need to chill out because we're not going anywhere. This is our hemisphere to deal with. We're the ones that influence here. You're not allowed to colonize any additional lands, so just back off. Britain basically says, who do you think you are? Monroe Doctrine? Are you kidding? You're calling that ancient piece of history out? And Britain doesn't want to hear about it now. So we had a strong possibility here of going to war with Great Britain. This is not good. But they get distracted because Germany was making some moves in Africa that Great Britain got very nervous about, and they moved their attention to making sure those lands in Africa were secure, and they sort of left the idea of Venezuela alone. So we wind up with a peaceful situation, and we do wind up, because of this tension, we wind up with even a stronger relationship with Great Britain than we had before. So that worked out. Now in Hawaii, we have a situation in Hawaii where a number of Americans, rich Americans, had gone to Hawaii to establish some sugar plantations. And we know that sugar is very costly and hard to grow because of the labor it demands. So these Americans are living in Hawaii, and I'm sure loving it, and growing sugar like crazy. And there were quite a number of them. And they kept trying to extend their influence into the Hawaiian government. Well, that's not going to go over so well. The problem the sugar producers were having was the McKinley tariff. Remember that thing that was 48.4%? That really high peacetime tariff that he put through as a congressman? Well, the McKinley tariff applied to the sugar here because Hawaii is not a U.S. territory or state. It's an independent place, And so the sugar producers have to jack their prices up in order to cover this 48.4% tariff, and they didn't like that. They wanted to just be able to sell their sugar outright in the US market without having that 48% jack in prices. So they wanted more influence in the Hawaiian government. Well, the natives of Hawaii weren't about to let that happen. They did not want Americans to have influence in their government. And Queen Liliuokalani, who was the ruler of Hawaii at the time, she absolutely put her foot down and said, no way, the Americans are getting influence here. So the Americans, the white Americans, rebel against the Hawaiian government. And here's the kicker. They had support from the U.S. military. So we had military there that was helping these rebels overthrow the Hawaiian government. Liliuokalani is overthrown. She's thrown out of power. She's put in jail, and she's done at that point. And there's an annexation treaty that they tried to push through Congress very quickly while Harrison was still president. They tried to push through this annexation treaty, and Harrison was going to sign it. However, it doesn't get through in time before Cleveland takes over the presidency again. And Cleveland was honest to a fault. He would not let this treaty go through because he knew that we had come about this in an improper manner. So he did not like this at all. So Cleveland withdraws the treaty. He says, no way, we're done. We're not annexing Hawaii on these grounds. This was totally wrong. But Liliuokalani was already thrown out of power, and he couldn't exactly reinstate her. So Hawaii was in this position of flux for a long time, or for a few years, until 1898, when the question of annexation would rise again, and that's a result of the Spanish-American War.